Ready? Hi everyone. I'll just point out straight away, it says to join Slido. Don't join Slido. I haven't installed the plugin. It's not going to work. I built a presentation on another laptop, so I'm very well prepared. So my name's Michael. This talk's effectively going to be about SOC core analysis skills, as it says. So it's not really going to be about technical skills. It's really my observations over the last 4 years working in different SOC teams, but predominantly over the last year. I have had the pleasure of working in Aspire Technology Solutions Security Operations Centre. So without the sales spiel, we're just based down on the Key side. I work with Scott here, who's one of our team leads actually. And that team I've seen kind of grow from, a few people up to about 15, 17 people. Before that, I actually started as a cybersecurity apprentice with the UK Gov. You can imagine how that went. It's public sector. And then I worked with NATO for a brief period of time, and then dotted around a few of the government departments before then joining Aspire. They kind of came along and said, "Hey, do you want to build a SOC?" I said, "Why the hell not?" And I think I've lost some hair in the process, to be honest, but it's a great team. Now, I think the last talks kind of set us up very well. I'm a manager as well, so we can't really avoid opening up presentations and stuff without stats. So I'm just wondering, these stats I've put on, I'm just wondering if anybody agrees with them, but as it says, 8.5 out of 10 was generally the average rating of importance when it comes to the businesses being surveyed for complementary or soft skills in the sector. 32% of those businesses as well over the last 12 months, they said that they've seen applicants for cybersecurity related roles lacking complementary or soft skills. So really what we're saying here is not necessarily the ability to use a tool or use technology or understand frameworks, but really that softer bit, writing reports, engaging with stakeholders, being able to take information in and generally make meaning of it. All of those softer skills seems to be lacking in the market with regards to people who apply for roles. 24% of all the businesses that were surveyed as well, they're not very confident in carrying out a range of tasks that require a mix of those technical and complementary skills as well. I found that quite surprising to be so high. A quarter in general is quite low, but across all the businesses, when I looked at those in that survey, I would have said that's quite a high figure, to be honest. I'm going to introduce something as a term. Has anybody seen the film? You don't get to guess because I think you've seen the slides. It's Forrest Gump, but I'd done a very brief stint with the British Army as a reservist, and at the time I actually asked a friend of mine who's he's in the Special Forces as a reservist, and I said, "Well, what's the difference apart from being special?" And he actually said, "Well, for me, it's the thinking soldier." I said, "Well, you're going to have to elaborate a bit more than that, because all of us have got brains, we can all think." And for him, he said that there's a general ideology, at least in the forces, where the difference or the demarcation between the typical soldier and the thinking soldier is somebody who can project manage, someone can manage their own time, they don't need to be given an instruction to follow through with something. They're able to analyse risk, take that in, and generally just see the bigger picture. And for me, I feel like that really kind of mirrors well within a security operations centre, or it mirrors well within just security operations in general, so pen test teams, infosec teams, etc. There is that quite fine demarcation in terms of skill level, in terms of being able to apply a framework or just use a piece of technology to then, obviously then that softer skill as well. Now, apologies, so this is supposed to be the bit where we're all supposed to use Slido. So what this was going to be was effectively a quick exercise to just get people's brains thinking, and also just to get a gauge from the room on, what would have been your question to ask of these things. We actually done this exercise with our team not too long ago, and it was interesting. There isn't really a wrong answer. It was more about, the questions that we ask when this type of alert comes in as a security operations centre analyst. The questions that you initially ask change depending on, the time of the day it is, so if you're a night shift based analyst, your shift buddy's ate fish the night before, so he's off sick and you're on your own, you might panic a little bit and you might not ask the right questions immediately, and you don't come to the right answers in a time that you would expect to be during a day shift. Normally you can turn to somebody or ask. But generally speaking, there are some interesting points just to flesh out from this alert name. So that's things such as intelligence, so it's no malicious. We could have a look at that, for example, and really dig into, as the intelligence kind of aged over time, how often do we roll our intelligence feeds, for example. We've got a characteristic there as well. It's a binary, it's an executable file. So if we're talking in the sense of a Windows system, could that really tell us a bit more about what the file is? Could that tell us, again, when we look at the intelligence and kind of tie those two things together, does that tell us a bit about what the kill chain is? What's the motivations of the threat actor that we're looking at? Behaviour as well is important. That kind of, places things very nicely in terms of what do we need to do about this when this alert comes in. So if we've set an alert to detect a non-malicious binary that executes versus a non-malicious binary that's written to the disk, they're very much two different things in the sense of, as an analyst, I need to do two different things. Either if it's written to the disk, then obviously I just need to think about deleting that file and then investigating what led up to that. However, if it's executed, maybe am I dealing with phishing, for example? Am I dealing with user-based execution? Am I dealing with a drive-by download from a phishing site? Or am I dealing with a threat actor that's already been in the environment for weeks, months, perhaps? We do see it quite regular. And they actually try to execute their own binaries as well, which in that case depends how we analyse this. So there's a lot of challenges. And then the last bit being kind of an environmental factor. So Mike's laptop, we can separate those two things. So we've got Mike as a person or an account on the domain or the network. We've got a laptop, which is ultimately not a server. So we then have to think about, what is Mike's role in the business? Does he have privileged access to information? Does he have routes into customers or partner networks as well, where his laptop could be abused for that? And again, thinking about the length of the breach as well in terms of timeline. If somebody has been sat on that laptop for quite a while, have they been able to siphon emails or keep an eye on emails to the point where they can use that knowledge now to move on to a server within the network as well? So really that whole Slido exercise that I've unfortunately fudged was going to ask you guys about what would be your questions. And some of the examples I think that came out of our kind of tabletop, if you will, a couple of months ago, was things about this binary itself. So what can the binary do? What is its characteristics? We do see in SOC analyst interviews, there's normally a typical exam question of, here's a malicious file, what would you do with it first? Well, chuck in a virus tool. So, that could be one of the first things to do. The execution element as well has been executed on any of the machines. You want to know how prevalent it is, both locally and kind of globally as well, if you're a multi-tenant environment. That could tell us as well a bit more about the intentions of the binary file. And again, Mike's laptop, there's a lot to ask about that as well. Has there been any other alerts? Who was the last user that was authenticated to that machine? And then we can work back from that as well and say, well, who actually authenticated? Might not be Mike, who's authenticated as Mike. So there's a bit of non-repudiation to apply there as well. So changing our way of thinking as well. It's kind of where things start as a SOC analyst. I think we all start in that role and smashing things into virus total and using Shodan and looking at IP addresses and always constantly using the same searches in Splunk or whatever scene you're using, or constantly clicking the same buttons in the EDR GUI because no one's ever updated it, nobody's ever showed you, you could do something a little bit differently over here. So really it's all centered around our way of thinking. We are habitual people, we're humans, we do like habits, and it is natural to just go, an alert comes in, I'm going to do the same thing every time. There is that age-old saying, I think, of doing the same thing and expecting different outcomes and all that. But I think there is method and madness sometimes of doing the same thing every time. But it is mostly about just changing the way that you think and being aware of that. So starting to talk about that self-awareness, really, of changing your way of thinking. First thing is bias. We see it all the time in SOC analysts, but we probably see it everywhere else in SecOps or cybersecurity. So there's a few different biases that we see. Confirmation bias being one, really when you've kind of already decided what the outcome's going to be when you're analysing some evidence and you really chase that down to try and confirm that. We see that all the time, to be honest, in SOC Analyst. I'm guilty of it myself as well, during incidents. Evidence bias is really important as well. You've got availability bias, which is on the slide as well. So ultimately, evidence bias being the fact that if you always investigate the alert that's just been on that slide there, and you always go to the firewall logs, you've got a bias towards the evidence without really recognizing that there could be a more valuable source of evidence. Could you be looking in the endpoint telemetry, such as Sysmon, or could you be looking at the EDR telemetry? Could you be looking at the web proxy logs as well? Could you be looking at identities such as Active Directory? Depending on the question you're trying to answer, you might actually arrive at a conclusion a little bit quicker, or a little bit more of an efficient manner. The bottom line advice for the bias stuff is not really to kind of quash it out and say, well, can't just run with the bias, just to be aware of it. So one thing I do like to do is, when I'm writing up reports, for example, after an incident, I do like to put some comments in and highlight bits of text that I've written and said, I've got a bias here, and this is the bias. So when somebody else proofreads that before the report is finalised, they go, well, do I agree or not with that bias? And that's fine to have. Again, I suppose we are humans. So there's two different thinking systems, I suppose, in our brain. I'm not a psychologist, by the way, but I do like to think of it as thing one and thing two, for anyone that's seen Cat in the Hat. But it's more formally known as system one and system two. So system one is your intuition, it's experience. It's that quick fire, make a decision now, I've decided on, what I want. System two is a little bit more deliberate. You could think of that to be used in a SOC during maybe a post-incident review, possibly in kind of a retrospective. Or if you're doing threat hunting, for example, that can be a bit more deliberate because you've got a lot more time. You're looking for something, you're not expecting to find something sometimes, maybe you are, but you're not expecting to make a decision immediately. It's more deliberate. Again, there's different biases in those, so if you were to split out system one and system two, you can imagine there are going to be different biases in each one, but you ultimately can't have one without the other. As it says there, our judgment as well, we actually judge people in about a tenth of a second of seeing them, so before the conscious mind of system two can actually decide what we really think of them, system one's already decided that boat sailed. And that's very much the same when an alert comes in. Fatigue's a real thing, workload's a real thing, especially if you work in a 24/7 SOC that we operate in as well. These alerts come in all the time. So system one's going to be doing a lot of the work there. It just wants to get it out. There's going to be SLAs that are going to be set. It's priority 2. Well, I've got 3 P1s over here. I've got this turning red over here. The manager's standing over the back of me at the moment asking if I can finalise whatever it was last week. So system one does a lot of the work in a SOC. And again, it's just to be aware of system one. It can sometimes be a bit of a pain in the neck. But sometimes it's good to go back over an alert and use a bit of system two. And there's a few different principles, a few different kind of frameworks out there that can help contextualize system two. But really this statement is actually in our skills framework, actually, within our SOC. But analysts should be deliberate and clear on actions to take during investigations. So really, the way to do that is to apply some principles. So, for example, you've got the Alexio principle. So that is, it's effectively a set of four questions. And ironically, the first question that it asks is, what question are you trying to answer? The second question is, what data do you need to answer that question? How do you then extract that data? How do you get that data out? And what does that data tell you? And I think that principle's been covered in quite a few different DFIR blogs recently, a few incident response blogs and articles. It's very useful when an alert comes in, just start. What question are you actually just trying to answer in the first place? And that tends to be a conversation I think both me and Scott do have with our analysts as well. We see alerts, as they start to triage it and they go straight to one log source. And that's not a personal thing with that person. It seems to be a habitual systemic problem across different SOCs that I've seen over 5 years of experience now, that they go straight to a certain log source and it's like, well, what question are you trying to answer? You've seen that claim being made by a tool, that no malicious binary is executed on this laptop. You've went to the firewall logs. Why are you doing that? And you can really demonstrate that through, typically in an ITSM tool, you've got a ticket to work with, you put comments on, or you'll scratch notes down. But it's always good to stick with that principle. It helps, from an audit perspective as well, when you go back over the ticket or your piece of work, whatever it is, your investigation record. to then demonstrate using that principle. This is the question I tried to answer. Here's maybe the bias. Here's where I looked for that data. Because when we try and answer that second question, such as where do I need to go to answer that question? How do I extract that data? There could be 2, 3, 4 different places depending on the size of the organisation that you operate in as well. So if somebody looks back over that and says, well, you've looked in the firewall logs, but you might have gotten a little bit more context because we had full packet capture over here, and we could have seen packet level information, for example. And that's again where the evidence bias kicks in. It might just be because you're so used to using firewall, and you don't really want to start using full packet capture because you're going to have to start learning the OSI model. You're going to have to start learning how to use Wireshark, for example, and a lot of other technical challenges. So it's all about using that framework to recognise some of the barriers, really from a skills perspective, but also if you need to share your work with somebody else, that they can understand what the method of the madness really was. The last one, actually is Hanlon's razor. So that is just about never attributing to malice to what can be explained by stupidity. Again, talking about being humans. Humans do stupid things. We click links. I was actually, I think, contracting at the time in UK Gov as a senior analyst, and I got fished, which was really silly, and I effectively got put into work jail to attend a fishing course, and everybody goes around and they're like, so we'll do a round table. It's almost as if anyone's been caught speeding, you go to a speed and awareness thing. And you kind of do a round table of introducing yourself, and I was like, yeah, I'm senior analyst from the security team. Oh yeah, so you'll be delivering this. I was like, okay. So yeah, I mean, people do it. But really what this is about from our standpoint as SOC analysts is just to take a neutral position, try and consider the probable causes as well. Because sometimes, systems do things just because systems do things. They're computing things. They're just given instructions sometimes by humans. So that's kind of what that's all about. Handling information is kind of a big area for SOC analysts again, and probably pen testers, to be honest. We take a lot of information in. We're expected to take that in, understand it, make meaning from it, and kind of come out the other end with either a decision, an action, or an instruction. Just do something with that, really. So there is quite a cool little loop called OODA. Don't fact check it. I think it came from the Royal Air Force, but it was mainly used in dogfights between fighter jets. And the whole point was that the pilot was supposed to take information in, they're supposed to analyse their environment, who their enemy is, etc., decide and act on that. And the whole concept behind the OODA loop was whoever closes that loop the fastest, in theory, should always come out the other end unscathed. And I've seen this again quite a few different times now that I retrospectively look over work, that I've actually seen this in different SOC teams. So a few years ago, we had, I think it was a phishing ticket, and we had things, different observables, such as a malicious link, a user account involved, or an email sender. There was a lot of different things there to analyse, and it was very much analysis paralysis. We were just stuck. There's just too many things to analyse. So there was a lot of observing and orientation going on, but there wasn't a lot of deciding and acting. So throughout that ticket, there was a lot of OSINT going on. So it's like, well, this link's malicious and it's got these characteristics. It relates to this file. There was a lot of virus totaling going on, as I like to call it. But then there wasn't, off the back of that, going, well, okay, it's delivered to the mailbox. Somebody's clicked it because we've seen the web proxy logs or whatever, and it's downloaded the file. They were observing that, but then they weren't going, right, I need to do something about that, or I need to give an instruction to someone, or at least say, this is what we need to do about that. So to be honest, in SOC teams, again, talking about bridging that skills gap, we see in kind of junior SOC analysts, we see a lot of observation, a lot of orientation, and it might be a confidence thing. It could be, it could depend on the culture in the team as well. If there's a lot of blame culture as well, no one's going to make a decision, let alone take out an action as well. So it needs to be the right environment for the analyst to operate in, really. So there's a lot of stuff on the OODA loop, to be honest, online on how you can map that back to a work culture and how you can really reinforce that second half of that loop. But generally speaking, the faster you close that loop, the faster you're going to beat the threat actor. And there's a lot of stats online about threat actors being faster and breakout time increasing and stuff like that. So I think it's a very important piece. A lot of what we do is telling a story. People like to be told a story. Again, we're humans. We like to hear it, whether or not it's the truth. It's all about that confirmation bias again. I speak to quite regularly financial directors, IT directors, head of securities, CISOs, who, you can kind of tell they want to hear a story, they don't want to hear the truth, and they really want to hear that actually it was this guy over here that clicked a link and it's all their fault, not the Russian person who sent the link, that's their fault, sack them. And they want to hear that in the report, and they will try and guide you down that route. So, bottom line is, it's very important to understand your audience, understand your stakeholders, and understand what's their requirements. What do they want to get out of this? If somebody's asked you to write a report and they want it to be 7, 8, 9, 10 pages, make sure they're not wasting your time, but make sure that what you're putting your name against in terms of advice or what actions are being taken, marry up with their requirements. Some of the tips for written communication, again, stuff that we see across different SOCs is generally reports of quite poor quality. And I think that stems back to the original survey, the stats there, because of I would say the types of people that become SOC analysts at the moment. There's a massive drive to attract people from different areas, different industries as well. And some of those people don't come from previous roles, for example, where they've had to write reports, or they've had to explain to a stakeholder, for example, or they've had to really communicate the risk and quantify that, for example. So there's a few tips there. Scott will know I love Keep It Simple, Stupid or KISS. I actually got that from the British Army. Unfortunately, I should probably drop that. It's not a good idea, but I do like to stick to that, to be honest. That's probably a bit of a system one principle. It's a bit of a Hanlon's razor thing, you can normally just explain it through stupidity. And just keep it simple. Don't overthink it. Don't overcomplicate it. If a binary comes in, a non-malicious binary, do we really need to understand what Windows API calls it makes? Do we really need to understand the strings that are within that compiled binary? Probably not at this stage. What we need to understand is, how did they get there in the first place? What's executing it? What's the parent process of it? What's the command line? And ultimately, a lot of what we deal with as SOC analysts is claims being made by security tools. And those claims are, there's a claim being made that something executed. Well, let's look at the rule logic. How do we know that it's being executed? Is it a certain flag? Is it a command line parameter? Is it a certain PID that's generated on the machine? So there's a lot of validation to do as well with all these disparate security tools as well. Some of the other principles are actually taken from the College of Policing. We actually found that, I think, online a few months ago. And it's, I think, looking at the website, it looks to be a publicly available library of training resources for kind of training police officers. And there's a really good article. I've put the link at the end of the slide deck, but it's all about delivering effective analysis. And some of those principles, bottom line up front, not bluff, kind of just get straight to the point, really. 433, which is all about, there shouldn't be any more than 4 paragraphs, and each paragraph shouldn't be any longer than 3 lines, for example. And that can keep things quite succinct. It can keep it quite concise. You've got ABC, or accuracy, brevity, and clarity as well. So just being clear and being accurate, especially in the police, I suppose, and law enforcement, I suppose they have to. But again, in SOCs, you might have to take quite a forensics approach. You might have to prove that, what you've seen and how you've analysed it is exactly what it is. So such as, if we see that something's executed on a system, we might have to use a couple of different sources. We might have to point back to our experience as an analyst and say, well, my experience of XYZ tells me that this is genuinely malicious, for example. We have to really be clear on that. And then there's different techniques as well, depending on what you want to get out of, whatever you're writing. And again, these can all be applied to either comments and tickets. It can be full reports. It could just be a single slide within an overall deck if you're summarising an incident. And for pen testers as well, I think, that's going to be quite important. There's a lot of findings that have to be communicated. So if you're writing for impact, if you're writing for risk, or you're writing for action, it can depend who you're talking to, really. But writing for risk, do we need to quantify that in some way? Do we need to link that back to financials in terms of impact to the business if that risk isn't remediated or at least quantified in the right way? Do we need to maybe visualise it as well, rather than just having bullet points or text? There's so many different ways to do written communication. For verbal communication, I'm actually not going to give good tips, to be honest. What I'm going to talk about is actually what impacts verbal communication, what makes it bad, I think is easier with verbal communication. The logo in the bottom right of the slide is Skyberry. I think Lisa Fellows done a very good article and interview on this recently. in the InfoSec community, where she introduced this particular resource. And when I went to dig into it, I realised that actually this marries up very well to security operations. So what Skyberry is it's an online resource of causal factors of accidents in the aviation industry. And when we think about the aviation industry, it's a very human-led industry. There's not a lot of automation, or at least they had to go with that a couple of years ago. It didn't go very well if you've seen the news. But it's a very good resource, and there's quite a few different kind of categories of factors, and one of those is verbal communication. I believe causes about 70% of accidents in the aviation industry. So things like fatigue, if you're on back-to-back flights, very much the same for working on night shifts or shift work. For example, our team works at 4 on 4 off, and they switch between days and nights quite often as well, so that, can really tire them out, and sometimes you just don't even know what day of the week it is. There's technical issues as well. Obviously, post-COVID, this is accelerated quite a lot. So typically in remote teams, you've got Microsoft Teams, but in full in-house teams like ourselves, if one person's working from home, sometimes we just forget to dial people into to meetings as well when they're working from home, and that can cause a breakdown in communication as well. That can then cause issues later on in the day, later on in the week, when certain people work on calls. Workload as well is massive. We talk about that a lot in cybersecurity, so I'm probably not going to labour that point, but, alert fatigue, everyone bangs about. Manner of speech as well is very important. It depends really on your environment. So, have you just walked straight up to somebody and, using quite an aggressive tone? Or are you just, talking in the work kitchen and breakout space in quite a casual manner? It depends again on your role. So, if you're a manager and you're giving out an instruction in quite a casual manner, that's not really in a workplace environment such as the kitchen area. Does that person take that as a formal instruction? No, probably not. And if it's quite an important instruction that relates to, let's say, an incident, maybe you didn't get the point across, and then you follow up later on and go, how are you getting on with that? And they're like, what do you mean? The same again for SOC analysts as well, when, we're communicating between each other. If we're handing over between shifts, for example, as well, it's very important to be quite objective, to be quite factual, to make sure that that person can take over from you on that next shift for the next 8 or 12 hours or whatever it might be. Subjectivity, it does impact verbal communication, but it's important. Again, we are human. We need to feed our opinions in. We need to use that system one, our intuition. What does our experience tell us as well? So it's quite important to be subjective as well. That does matter, rather than just kind of being a robot saying, here's the facts, here's the data from the internet, put it in ChatGPT, and this is what that's telling me. Just use your experience as well. It's important, We've seen analysts who've got even a year of experience, but they've got a ton of exposure to certain areas within tech, that they can make a decision very quickly based on that. Incident reports as well. So this picture, I don't know if anybody knows what this is, but it's the term rubber ducking. It's not an innuendo. The whole point of it is actually in software development houses, where the concept is that if you can explain your code to a rubber duck, you should be able to understand how it works. You should be able to explain it to an exec or a stakeholder. And I don't think we do a lot of that, to be honest, in cybersecurity or in security operations. We're not developing things, but there's a lot of outputs from our work. We do a lot of great work. We write up those reports. We fill in a lot of tickets. We set in a lot of calls with different people. So it's important to kind of rubber duck your work. Just explain it yourself. Go through it with you in your head, or just on a one-on-one basis with the person next to you at your desk or over a Teams call. Just go through it step by step, and that sometimes helps me from a rep perspective. I kind of go through it and go, that doesn't make any sense at all. But avoid assumptions. Again, as it says, no matter how technical or good you are on those tools, the success of that report is really how you tell the story. That's what people are reading it for. If they don't get the narrative, or they don't get what you're getting at, they don't know what you're trying to get out with them, they will just close that report and put it in the bottom of their Outlook inbox. Know your audience, and there's a very good resource down there, which is Storyteller Tactics by Pipdex. Pipdex do kind of like tarot cards of tips. There's a load of different ones, but the Storyteller Tactics one is really good. And I'll just finish off with some tips to implement, because I appreciate I've probably just thrown a lot of principles, a lot of ideas, without going, well, what the hell do we actually do with this? If you're, a SOC manager, or you're aspiring to lead a SOC or get into that kind of capacity within a security operations team, I would encourage you to look at NIST NICE. It's a framework of skills, knowledge, etc. And it's not just technical by nature. It has a lot of other softer skills in there. But within the NIST framework, it also groups those by role as well within security operations. So if you needed just to get started, you can just take a cyber incident responder and it gives you all the skills and knowledge already needed. And then you can start to assess either yourself against that or your team. Provide feedback to each other. So that OODA loop as well is important. You need to constantly have that feedback loop. You need to be constantly saying to each other, yeah, that's great, that's not so great, etc. I'm not going to give you advice on how to give feedback, such as the shit sandwich. But ultimately, it depends on you as a team, how you work with your peers, to how you prefer to do feedback. Quality assurance is important, QA. There's a very good article by Expel, John from Expel, unfortunately can't remember his surname, but Expel.com, they're a big MDR house, I suppose, in the US, but they do a brilliant article on how to perform quality assurance for Security Operations Centre. Performing post-incident reviews, lesson learned sessions as well. They're great to identify, okay, where's the bias? Where was my system one a little bit wrong here? Could we have told the story a little bit better? How is it that we gathered the evidence? Were we asking the right questions from the get-go, for example? Tabletops, CTFs and labs, it's actually really good to see Black Hills are here. So backdoors and breaches, they are giving away those. We do them every now and then. We've got the decks in the office. But it's good to do tabletop exercise, good to do labs, CTFs and stuff, and really do that in a no-pressure environment. But sometimes, again, doing that in production can sometimes draw out the real reactions when it is live fire, so don't avoid that either. And that's it really, just some links and references. So the Skybury stuff, Hanlon's Razor, the Police College, and then there's a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. That's it. Any questions? Yes.
How do you alter or train people to write for tickets so that you can actually understand what they've looked at previously rather than writing a report or something like that?
Yeah.
Obviously, a good ticket tells you what you need to know rather than one that doesn't. Yeah,
you're bang on. It's more of a cultural thing, to be honest. It's really about changing their mindsets and really selling it why, rather than it just needs to be done because a manager somewhere needs to do something. It needs to be sold on the basis that it's all for self-improvement. It helps them understand kind of the bigger picture of analysis. One thing that I'm seeing teams having some good success with is using ChatGPT. So I think our service desk team are actually using AI to generate the summaries of their analysis or their work on tickets that are customer facing effectively. So AI can really help, but some general guidelines and guardrails as well can help. So say, some of the techniques that we've covered in those slides as well. So those principles such as bottom line up front. You can write examples that the analysts can then read from and then learn from that as well.
I think that's all the time we have.
Yes.
Have a round of applause.